Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen, and today I want to talk about books about longing. Okay, before we even get into the video today, I'm going to preface this by saying if you hear the squeaking in the background, there is a baby bird in my neighbor's house in like a bush that's being cared for by its mother, but swear to God, for like the last week, it's been incessant squeaking, crying all day. He or she stops at night, but it's a little much, and so I apologize. If you unsubscribe, I totally understand. I have no control over this. It is not his fault. He's just trying to live his life, or her life, so I will let them be. However, it is infuriating. My mind is... I'm losing it. I'm losing it. So, before we get into it, I will share what I'm drinking. It is a sour that's kind of spicy. Allegedly. It says it's called Spectrum from Prairie Artisan Ales. It's a sour ale with cinnamon, hibiscus, and chili peppers. So it's cute, a little rainbow moment. I love their can art, always amazing. But yeah, so let's see what it's giving. I love a spicy moment for a beer. Ooh, that's really good. I love the cinnamon in there. Yeah, like I love a hatch chili lager moment. I love like a spicy jalapeno-ish moment in a beer. Love that. It's usually on like lighter beers, but I love a spicy, like just one beer. There's this really good beer that I'll feature one day on this channel. It's called Socoveza, I believe, from Stone. And it's like a Mexican hot chocolate beer. I think it has like a hint of spice in there too. It's so good. But getting into the video while I enjoy this beer. Last night I finished Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. This is a book I was really excited about because it sounded like a DWM from the premise. So we follow an unnamed narrator, classic millennial trope, and we see her basically committing acts of desperation. She's trying to find herself through relationships with men in particular, but also through substance abuse issues, particularly alcohol. And she's 25, I believe, at the start of the book, or through most of it. She's like in the mid-20s. And you see her just partying, trying to find herself through dating and sex. And basically, upon closing this book, I started on Friday, I finished it last night, Sunday night. I adore this book. I think it is so cleverly written. I think it is so incisive and so emotionally visceral on every single page of the text that I could not put it down throughout the entire weekend. That's all I read this weekend, and I loved my time with it, despite it being a considerably bleak and tragic look at this woman who is trying to find herself through love and longing for men, and through that longing for men, finding herself in peace and solace in her own identity and in her happiness. And you basically see whether she will ever attain that. I will say, going into that book, if you are sold by my description, trigger warnings. My dog is barking. Trigger warnings galore. We have subjects such as substance abuse issues, including alcohol, some drug use as well. She has an eating disorder. Sexual assault occurs, abuse, all kinds of abuse from her boyfriend and others. So there's a lot going on in that book that is very tough to read at times. However, I do think that it is a rewarding read. It's often very bleak, but I think it's necessarily rooted in that bleakness to get to the point of what Megan Nolan is trying to examine in terms of female longing and desire, and how that interplays with depression and identity, and trying to reconcile all those things to kind of cut to the essence of what a key underpinning of humanity generally. I was thinking about this last night, and I realized that I often on my channel, I talk about books that I am drawn to, which are books about loneliness, solitude, grief, power balances, like in relationships. And I realized also, in light of me listening to a recent Melissa Broder podcast in which she was giving recommendations based on books about longing, I kind of put together that I think what I'm trying to get at when I'm explaining those things that I enjoy in fiction is that I really like books about longing, about someone yearning for something that they seemingly cannot attain. And I think that's such an interesting premise for fiction in terms of being able to explore a multitude of subjects with that just general underpinning. And it made me think today, I was thinking about maybe doing a video about this, and I was like, I feel like every book is kind of in a way about longing. I mean, I looked at the definition of longing, and it is, from Merriam-Webster, a strong desire, especially for something unattainable or a craving. Also unattainable or distant, an example filled with longing for home. And so I think in a lot of the books that I constantly rave about, give 5 stars, they all have some form of this theme. And so I thought this video would kind of be a cool kind of look at this. I mean, I feel like this might be a dumb video because I'm just kind of saying, using a general theme, very broad theme that is in many texts and trying to get something out of it. But I think it will show you and hopefully illuminate for me what I like so much about these books. And so I was going to kind of scroll through my Goodreads, and this is very like off the cuff, just talking about something I thought about last night. So yeah, before I get into the rest of the books that I want to talk about, these are many that I have talked about in this channel already, so I hope I'm not rehashing too much, but I would love to kind of talk about these, why I love them, and kind of think about this theme throughout books, and whether it's kind of a particularly millennial theme that is in kind of more current fiction, which I tend to read. So yeah, I don't know what my thoughts are. I feel like this is kind of pointless, but let's just go into it. I'm just going to vibe. So also, I can't really tell what I look like right now in this camera, but I do have a pimple in the middle of my nose. And yesterday, I went on a hike with my mom, and for some reason, I put some sunscreen on, but right here, I think I hit it well with some tinted moisturizer, but right here, sunburn, and my nose that has a pimple on it has a sunburn. So I'm looking a little crazy, but I think I look all right with this lighting. Oh my God. I'm getting older, my body's changing, and I'm not going to apologize for it. Katya fans, you know. Anyways, so getting into the list of books that I wanted to talk about that I particularly love that focus on this theme. So I will say, I think kind of also underpinning what these books are that I really enjoy is often someone like at the cusp of some change in their life that is trying to attain something, whether that be self-actualization, whether that be moving through grief, whether that be processing trauma, whether that be grappling through and hopefully getting a handle over mental illness, or just being able to process it and sit with it, and what that does to a person, particularly who is a younger adult. And I mean, I think pretty clearly I'm interested in these books because I am myself a young adult. I am 25. I will say that I have been fortunate enough to not have to deal with significant grief in my life or particular traumas, but I do find myself very drawn to these types of novels, I think potentially because I am afraid of it, and afraid of the potential of it happening to me, of me potentially having to experience some kind of grief or trauma or potential loneliness on my own, and kind of preparing myself for that or something. And I'm not sure if that's a rational fear or not. I think that's kind of a fear that many people have, but I'm trying to get at the essence of like why is that my thing? Taking it all the way back to On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, we have Ocean Wang. His character, I think this is somewhat based on his real life. His name is a little dog, and he's writing a letter to his mother. So right there, he's longing to speak to his mother. He knows that she is illiterate. And you see him grappling with his identity as an immigrant and as a queer young boy, and grappling with those and longing for his mother and for his mother's approval. And that book, I haven't really talked about it on my channel before, but I adored it. I read it back in 2019, so it was a while back, but that was another like seminal book for me in terms of me starting to love reading again so much. I started getting involved in my book club with that book, and so that's one that I really enjoyed. Myself as a queer person, I loved those aspects of the story and that I could identify with them as well. So yeah, that's the first one to start. Next I have Bunny by Mona Awad. This is a book that I loved last year. It was in my top 10 of the year. And while at first glance this isn't really a book that seems to be about longing, it's kind of, superficially more so about the horror of these seances that the main character gets involved with this clique of girls. It's very kind of mean-spirited, and they're in an MFA program, so it's also about writing and everything. But one thing that really underpinned this book was the main character, I think her name is Samantha, her longing for, one, success as a writer, but ultimately just trying to find herself and move through this loneliness and seclusion that she feels as an outcast and an outsider, and the ways that she, I don't want to spoil too much of the story, but the way that she compensates for that through different things. If you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to spoil it. But I think this book is so cleverly written, using kind of like a literary horror thriller bent to get at this issue of, in burgeoning adolescence into adulthood, what that looks like for people. Yeah, so I love that book. I think there's so much nuance to it that I often see in reviews kind of gets overlooked. I know it's kind of like a glossy horror book with it's kind of campy and gory, but I love that there's also so much nuance there about those topics. So I love that book so much. I will fight anyone that doesn't like it. I'm just kidding. But yeah, really love it. Next, let me just briefly touch on this. The entire catalog of Otessa Moshfegh is about longing and processing grief and being an outsider and longing for, as her short story collection is titled, Homesick for Another World, longing for something that's different from the mundane aspects of our present moment. I love that she is able to parse through the often grotesque and sick thoughts of a person that at first glance we're uncomfortable sitting with, but then also identify within ourselves the ways that we can kind of sympathize with this person and think about things that we may have thought or actively think that are not considered normal or the status quo or what we should be thinking, especially in terms of like optimization, such as in My Year of Rest and Relaxation, in which we see a narrator that completely pulls away from optimizing herself in the sense that she wants to just sleep for a year. However, it's kind of ironic that she also wants to reach some form of self-actualization, like a reset for herself through this action. And so I like that Otessa Moshfegh plays with this push and pull of a character thinking that they're kind of operating outside the bounds of what, you know, regular people are dealing with. However, they are also so deeply rooted in it for various reasons. And I guess I'll save my thoughts on that for another video that I'm working on. But yeah, I think she is my favorite author. She does that for me perfectly. I think she's just, let me not go on another rant, but for people that don't follow me on Instagram, another update in my standing of Otessa Moshfegh, I renamed my car. I have a Tesla. You can like rename it in the car, and I named it Otessa Moshfegh. If you can't tell, I am securing the galley of her new book coming out next summer called Lebona, and I will read it. I will get a galley. If I don't get a galley, homophobia, right? I'm just kidding. This is all in jest, everyone. I'm not being serious. But I really hope to get a galley of that because I will be screaming about the book next year. Unsubscribe now if you don't want to deal with me dealing with that. Another one, oh my God, the book I never shut up about also, Real Life of Brandon Taylor. We follow Wallace, a graduate student who is longing for self-discovery and approval and just basically longing for not being subject to microaggressions by his peers, and him trying to process his trauma and also become something for himself despite the harm that he had suffered as a child, and moving through that as a Black queer boy in the Midwest. Brilliant novel. Brandon Taylor is the best. Can't, like, insane. Another one, Luster by Raven Leilani. This is another book about a young Black woman who is trying to discover herself through toxic relationships, very akin to acts of desperation. I would say it's somewhat different, though. It's a little less, well, I don't know. They're quite in conversation with each other now I'm thinking about it. But I do think Raven Leilani parses at this millennial trend in fiction in a very good way, I would say. I'm not saying that as a slight. I like these books. I will fight people about millennial fiction. Millennial fiction's good, y'all. That's not the conversation we're having today. But it's really crazy. I'm just like scrolling through. I've read so many books that kind of touch on this. Maybe I'm not even making sense. Maybe this is just like fiction, like characters wanting something. But I think there's something about the unattainability aspect of the longing part, or like the fantasizing or the idolization of some kind of like mental prospect that is in many of these books that I just find so endearing. Another one, Apartment by Teddy Wayne. Underhyped, underread, needs to be read more. I talked about it a lot in my beginning of my booktube career, but I want to bring it up again because it's so good. I think this one's also an unnamed narrator trend that looks more so at masculinity and self-discovery in light of kind of conflicting feelings about sexuality. And this is a book also set in an MFA program in which this writer, he is trying to become a better writer, however, he's kind of failing at it. He befriends this other guy who is really naturally a gifted writer, who seems so sure in himself, and that kind of picks away at the narrator's sense of identity and self-fulfillment. And you see their friendship build into a climax that, woo, it was wild. Love a thriller that doesn't have gore in it. Like, so good. My jaw hit the floor when I read that book. And the writing is so good. Like, it's a little pretentious, a little stuffy, but I like that sometimes, and I was in the mood for it then. Short read it, so good. What Happens at Night by Peter Cameron. Also underhyped, love that book. We follow a couple that goes to a very far away, unnamed country, unknown time period, odd feeling, weird, creepy vibes, don't know what's going on, very off-putting. But the wife has uterine cancer and cannot have a child of her own biologically through gestation, and they go there to adopt a child because it's easier to get a child in this country than it is wherever they're from. It's unspecified. I think it's the United States. But we see them longing for a child. But however, this book interestingly looks at parenthood and marriage in the ways that we try to find ourselves through loving others, particularly in a marriage context. So tying it back to acts of desperation, this is something I find fascinating, and seeing a power imbalance between two people in the ways that we try to find something in ourselves through another person, and whether that can be possible or cannot due to a variety of forces on people. I think that's why I do also like these isolated stories, in that we see, I guess there's kind of one test subject that we're playing with and putting different variables on them. I feel like I don't know what I'm talking about. If this video makes no sense, Just trying, okay? I'm trying. I'm just talking off the cuff, okay? Opening a dialogue. Maybe I'm just, whatever. We'll see. Yeah, so this book, they try to get this child. There's many problems that come up along the way. Kind of a supernatural feel at times, but don't be put off if you don't like that, because I think it's just mysterious. You don't know, it's surreal. You don't know what's real, what's fake, but ultimately the crux of the issue in the plot is very clear, and the writing is very clear and easy to read, but there's just a lot of ideas playing in that book that I really, really think are interesting and kind of play into this theme of longing as well. So that's a good one. I haven't talked about that in a while. That one's delicious. Oh my god, there's so many. Okay, let me get to the point here. What are some other staples of this? Burnt sugar, abnidoshi. I'm just gonna do rapid fire. A woman who has a very fraught relationship with her mother, and her mother has dementia, and her yearning for connection with her mother despite not being able to access memory, and the way that plays out, crazy. Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, classic millennial fiction, horror bent in which a woman is a photographer. She's in her early 20s, engaged in lots of debauchery, going out drinking all the time, substance abuse issues, and she finds identity in herself through photography of average looking men. And so very similar to Acts of Desperation in the sense that a young woman is relying on men in a different way to get some kind of self-gratification in the ways that is potentially not possible, and the other traumas that are playing upon her and her trying to discover the reasons why she behaves in this way. So good. Death in Her Hands with Otessa Moshfegh. I already talked about her, but I talked about the book enough. I'm sorry, everyone. I know this is more than just a Death in Her Hands booktube account, but longing for sure. Moving into books I read more recently, Milkfed, Melissa Broder. She explicitly says this book is about longing, but it follows a woman with an eating disorder who attempts to find herself through a queer relationship with this woman that works at a froyo shop, in the ways that her familial trauma, in the sense that her mom was very unaccepting of her and her weights throughout her childhood and adolescence and teenage years, how that plays about her identity now and her trying to find herself through this relationship, also finding herself through love and the longing for this woman and also for self-fulfillment. Love that. Die My Love, Ariana Harwicks. Another book about motherhood, very bleak, one of the darkest books I've read, in which we get a look at motherhood and longing. This is a longing recommendation from Melissa Broder as well, but her trying to think through what her marriage means to her and why she's a mother, what the feeling she's experiencing, kind of some antagonism towards her newborn child and why she's having those feelings. She begins to lose her mind through it. Love the horror, surreal, crazy, gut-wrenchingness of this book. Takes it to a very, extreme, but I think this one is a really interesting look at motherhood, and one that I've never really seen before, in terms of just seeing a woman completely spiraling in asking these questions about herself and what she wants, and feeling trapped and isolated and secluded in this marriage and parenting, and how she can't seem to find where does she fall into that dynamic herself, whether she just kind of loses herself to those forces. I think that book is so good. Read it. Whereabouts, Jhumpa Lahiri. I mean, the text on solitude. This one just came out, I think, a couple weeks ago, but this one we follow. This one is a literal DWM, a depressed woman moving through a city, but you see every short little vignette, it's a different place within Italy, whether it's at the store, on the street, at the table, on the couch. And so you see her literally moving and being depressed and in her solitude and trying to find herself. What does she want to do with her life? Why is she feeling this way? What does it mean to be sitting in solitude, and how does that impact your psyche? Whether solitude is a good thing or a bad thing, depending on various factors in your life. I'm giving you the heat in this video. This is the heat. This is my top recommendations. All of these, so good. Bluets, Maggie Nelson. This is nonfiction, but I'm including it anyways. This is basically a longing for everything about the color blue, but the blue as a metaphor for a variety of things, whether that be an ex-lover, yearning for happiness, yearning for getting out of the rut of depression and trying to reconcile that helpless feeling of not knowing kind of the point of existence. I think that book is very existential, very weird. Also comments on pop culture and other things as well, but brilliant stuff. So the next one, Second Place by Rachel Cusk. This one is also a little bit different from the rest. This book, I'm going to talk about it more in my May wrap-up, but this book broke my brain, because this one is looking at art in particular and the ways that this woman, she invites this artist to live in her husband's second home. It's attached to their property in the middle of nowhere, basically. Her obsession and attachment to this artist that comes to live with her, and the fallout that ensues when he brings another woman with him to the second place, and the ways that this narrator, I believe her name is, how she's trying to use art and this man to find herself and to avoid like kind of destruction, and how she ends up kind of doing that to herself through her longing for him and the kind of revelation that she's seeking through his involvement with her and the art that he makes. And she wants to be like the subject of his art, and when he pushes back against that and doesn't completely give in to her ambitions and what she wants, how that kind of destroys this woman. It's a really good book. It's a little pretentious, but please welcome to the stage, little pretentious. So yeah, that one, that's a good one. Rachel Cusk on her big brain shit as always. And then finally, another book I'm going to talk about more later this month in my International Booker shortlist wrap up, but it is The Employees by Olga Ravin. I have been dying to talk about this book on this channel. I was going to do an individual book review, might do it still, but this is a book that's on the shortlist, and rightfully so. This one and At Night All Blood is Black by David Diop, not sure which one I want to win so far. I still have to read two and like I have a little bit left of a short story collection on the shortlist, but The Employees. This is an AI versus human capitalist workplace novel that is so smart, doing so much, and looking at longing, particularly in the capitalist kind of like workplace sense, and looking at the differences between what being a humanoid / AI versus a human, like what that distinction is, if there is any, and what that individual longing that can be in both a human and an artificial human, what that looks like and why that is, and the ways that capitalism, optimization, the constant buy-in to these opportunistic capitalist forces, how that destroys people, and the ways that those forces ultimately play into longing in terms of self-discovery, and how in basically like all of these books, how capitalism plays into almost every aspect of longing as well. So I think that book is similarly big-brained. It's told in a bunch of statements from a bunch of employees on this spacecraft in the 2100s, so 22nd century. Okay, I'm so sorry. My camera just died, or it didn't die. I used all my gigs in my memory card. However, I will wrap it up shortly. The Employees, please read it if you like any kind of sci-fi dystopian books, but also even if you don't, I think it's so interesting and well done. I'm sorry for my fan. I'll be quick, but it's so good looking at this idea of longing in both a human and AI kind of bent as well. So good. Love that. And finally, like I mentioned at the beginning, read Acts of Desperation if you like these themes. So I will leave it there. I hope this video made any kind of sense. I feel like this is probably so like obvious to many people, but I think this was a really interesting way of me kind of figuring out why the 5-star reads are so good to me. Like what are the thought process going on in my head that make those books work so well? And I think that's it. I think it's this idea of self-discovery and external forces on a person and how those play into their desire for themselves, for other people, for personal growth, for getting over trauma, grief. Like all of these ideas are so interesting to me, and I think that's why I've kind of been drawn to them in the literary fiction sense over the last year or so, I guess. So that's all the thoughts I have. Hope this makes sense. Hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you in the next one. Cheers.